and others called creeping things upon the earth. Creations or rulers whom God promises to punish in Psalm 74 verse 13, or even in Isaiah chapter 27 verse 1, which reads, "In that day the Lord with his sore and great and strong sword shall punish Leviathan, the piercing serpent, even Leviathan, that crooked serpent, and he shall slay the dragon that is in the sea." Now, another error that has smeared the Catholics as the harlot of Revelation can be cleared by this Psalm 74. Because Psalm 74 is the place where the idea of them being harlot that sits on the waters is given, but in figures. Because Revelation uses figures in the prophets. Revelation is built upon figures given by the prophets, or given to the prophets by the Spirit of God. So we read Psalm 74 again, which says, "Thou didst divide the sea by thy strength, thou breakest the heads of the dragons in the waters, thou breakest the heads of Leviathan in pieces, and gavest him to be meat to the people inhabiting the wilderness." Their realms are called seas, but all creations of God are categorized. Some are called waters, and others by other names, including fires or darkness and flames and spirits and clouds and so forth. So these signified as waters include humans and other creations unseen. So their being on the waters is the same idea in Revelation, in that they sit or they are in the waters or sit upon the waters or they do something on the waters. That's the idea also in Revelation, in that they are given, but in Revelation they are given as a harlot sitting on the waters, but which many people mistake for Rome. A city in scriptures means a congregation of rulers, so it can also mean a kingdom. Now theirs is a kingdom of darkness, the kingdom of these gold dragons and fowls. Their harlotry is because servants of God, whom he set for vast influence, if they choose to go their way against God's command, they are said to be in fornication or adultery against his ways. In that sense, they are called a harlot, which things also Israel was several times called. So for now, these gold dragons being rulers, they are the harlot. Even as you see in Revelation, there is a verse which concerns them, saying that all the blood of all the slain in the earth of the prophets is upon them, because they have been rulers for that long, including the blood of Abel. Rome has not killed all people that have died in the earth. So Jerusalem above is the wife that comes to be the new ruler, to replace this called a city, which is a harlot. So Jerusalem is the city of God, which we could go on, but this is enough concerning these gold dragons. They are the rulers today. They run the show, down to things that we eat. So they are signified by the number 5 when singled out as unique creations on the 5th day. So because these dragons from realms called seas are also the 7 heads of the dragons, that's why you read most beasts come from the sea, because the world is ruled by these called seas. Whereas we also have some coming from the earth, granted, but those coming from the earth are subservient to these coming from the sea for the most part. So these from the sea, they run the show of these times. So their influence is a salvation issue, down to things that we practice, things we love, because their activities as an influence of our ways are unclean before God. They are rulers typified as seas in scripture, besides another called rivers, rulers upon whom God has founded affairs of this existence on their ways, according to Psalm 24. So they are foundations of the people in this world for their heart desires, in their lifestyles, outside of Jesus Christ. Even as Jesus Christ is our foundation for our lifestyles. That's what Psalm 24 means, in that he founded the world upon them. The earth therefore must reflect the nature of these gold dragons and others called fowls, or others unknown to us, even as our nature must reflect the nature of Jesus Christ as our foundation. That is the idea behind the sea and its dragons being the foundation of the world and the earth in Psalm 24. dragons famed as the marine kingdoms. Therefore, wherever there is a measure or a count of 5, or a prime multiple of 5, or 5 as a multiple of 10, or items or brass, then these creations are in the picture directly as a reference, or a ruler who is set over their affairs. Like we see the feet of Jesus Christ being brazen. That's the idea that brings in these creations in the picture. Israel prefigured all creations or categories of creations that shall have influence over God's creation in the age to come. So it was the point of these valuations in shekels to up to 50 shekels, or when someone offended and they added a fifth part. That was the idea, because rulers from among sons of men shall be set over these gold dragons, because the people of Israel represented all God's people due for redemption, because the term peoples is not unique to only humans in scriptures, no, not in prophecy. These are the things which Romans chapter 8 verses 20 to 25 also teaches, or Colossians chapter 1 verse 20. So in the unique day of their deliverance, for an example, is represented by the cherubim in the temple in Jerusalem, which we have touched upon, in that their wings being 5 cubits. Therefore, these creations are in the picture. It magnifies them being in the context, because it's not written that cherubim are dragons. Therefore, when a measure of 5 is on them, it means they are set as rulers over circumstances of these called dragons or fowls. Already touched on this example before. Now you know how it works, because these numbers reflect the creation day of rulers over God's creation, and therefore this number 5 singles out these of the 5th day. Of all creations with influence, this class are the most known, yet not from a scriptural point, but for their problematic activities making inroads among men. The famous marine kingdoms of the dragons or the serpents, and because they are rulers over God's creation, particularly the world. And when humans practice ways of ruling creations, they go by the names of those ruling creations. Therefore, those who are wicked are often signified in scripture as broods of serpents, because it is written, the world and the earth both are founded upon these called dragons, but collectively called the seas in Psalm 24. And therefore the world must reflect their nature, because they are destroyers. Incidentally, Genesis chapter 1 verse 21 calls these as dragons, but distorted for whales. Yet Moses says in Exodus chapter 7 verse 9, and the prophets also say, Isaiah 27, which we saw, and Psalm 74 or 148, they are all called serpents or dragons and Leviathan. But John directly calls them devils. So these are the things we are dealing with when you read this measure of 5. But if in the context of the temple, it's in the time when they shall be renewed to serve in millennial purposes. Another category of the 5th day are fowls, or called birds of the air, which are hinted at in Ecclesiastes chapter 10, in that when you speak a word in secret of these called lords of wings, they carry what you say to the king or a rich man whom you curse. So these are in the picture. They are spirit creations who watch us unseen. They are creations of the 5th day. All these creations are what we know as sea dwellers, because as you know, Genesis says that fowls and these fishes were created on the 5th day, and they all come from the waters. They are the marine kingdoms, not physical seas and not physical birds. And so to read these things and take them physically, you expose yourself to things that are against you, but not knowing where they come from. And so when you go for prayers, you pray the wrong prayers, not knowing what you're dealing with. For the most part, even though God is merciful and delivers regardless. So these spirit existences of wicked beings, they are largely signified by the number 5 when it comes to these of the 5th day. And so the idea is clear that many references to fowls or birds of the heavens or mountains, it concerns creations with influence behind the scenes, not physical birds and fishes. Again, of all creations indicated as being due for restoration, these called dragons of the seas feature a lot. One of which cases which shows the day of their redemption is that of a sea, but given in figures or depictions which are not easily recognizable. That is the sea on the 12 oxen. From this perspective of renewal of these creations of God with influence, it is clear what a pigeonhole of understanding we have concerning Messiah's redemption, because his redemption is far-reaching into realms of creations not human. Places today's scripture called desolations of old, often also called ancient people, and all these other creations of influence whereby some make their inroads in the world of humans, certainly unto damnation. And so Paul, who was given to understand these things, teaches, saying, unto principalities and powers might be made the manifold wisdom of God by the church. Now, some of which writings ought to interest a person with the least interest in what else the Bible has to say. Because think about it, in what way can the manifold wisdom of God be made known to these who are destroyers, and for what purpose? Since they seem to know more than humans, being spirit beings, let alone that they are rulers. Because to be a spirit is one thing, but to be a spirit and a ruler is another thing. Which rulers they are. So in what way would a church make the manifold wisdom of God known to them? That scripture didn't mean that as pastors teach, these guys who are unseen eavesdrop on us to hear. No. Yes, they eavesdrop on us because they are destroyers, in that even some of them inspire doctrines to be taught by some unsuspecting pastors to destroy their congregations and themselves. But this scripture meant that come a certain time, followers of Jesus Christ glorified shall be set over these powerful creations as lights unto righteousness. That's what Isaiah, for an example, Isaiah chapter 32 verse 2 or 66 verse 9 means. Or even in Ezekiel, which depicts that water shall come from the temple. Water has been a people. The temple means collective rulers for God. So of them who issue out of the temple to go to these realms is the time which depicts the manifold wisdom of God being taken to these who are now destroyers, which duties are said to be of God towards us this day. And so just as God is doing that to us today, giving us his wisdom, so shall this duty fall unto the sons of God, as Isaiah chapter 32 verse 2 says, which, as you see, that verse says this very thing which another scripture says of God. That is what God meant, that the seed of Jacob shall be among nations as dew from the Lord. Again, the very language used of Messiah in other places. And that is the time of God granting the saints to wear white linen in Revelation, which is the righteousness of the saints, meaning to rule as priests of God, the station of which Israel was called, and Jesus Christ over these creations and righteousness. So this is how scriptures are linked from Genesis to Revelation. So there is so much to say, but the topic is about dragons in the deep and their numerical symbolism, which refers to them as unique creations for influence over God's creation. So the vast work of Jesus Christ of Nazareth also covers them and many more. Amazing how that one single act at Calvary meant so much for all creation, which Paul says were subjected unto vanity, alluding to what God spoke in Genesis to Adam, saying, "Cursed is the ground for thy sake." The ground meant uncategorized creations of God. We cannot go into details of this, but know that the ground meant creations of God. They were the ones who are cast for the sake of Adam. Anyway, of this signified as dragons from realms called seas, a realm depicted as a large basin or trough in the temple. In figures of their presence, all of them are also called the crystal sea in Revelation. These are whose influence or whose circumstances in the passage are indicated by the number 5. So this should suffice for this figure of a 5, because it is straightforward if you read it from other places where a 5 or brass appears. All concepts in scripture given for our doctrine bear on other parts of scripture. We therefore labored at length in numerical symbolism, that it may also be understood. But like many things that are not familiar, It may also take many attempts at studying several examples of this numerical symbolism before it can be really understood. We study to know all that is revealed in Scripture, because all what is revealed in Scripture is given for doctrine, and for reproof, and for correction, and for instruction unto righteousness. But specific books are for specific purposes. Those purposes being to furnish us with at least one or a combination of these benefits named in that Scripture. That is, to serve as a doctrine, or for reproof, or for correction, or for instruction unto righteousness, or a combination of these, but not all at once. No Scripture does that. Meaning that specific books have their part to play in the overall purpose for being doctrine given by God to us and to righteousness, because that's the overall purpose for Scripture. But in its parts, it does the reproving, it does the correction, it does for instruction, reorienting us in the way to go with the overall purpose of righteousness before God. Therefore, some concepts in Scripture simply furnish us to know why things are the way they are in the world, to establish us in our faith, while some are for specific knowledge, to walk free from reproof, leaving other benefits to other scriptures in the Bible. This is the idea of numerical symbolism as a teaching. For an example, we cannot always be driven to do tithing to the point that even some believers forsake the faith because of the practice which they find insufferable, simply because they don't understand what tithing means as an ordinance to start with, being a concept also derived from this one of numerical symbolism. Now, such cases of abandoning the faith are the extreme. Therefore, they are a reflection of a lopsided understanding of Scripture. And at this moment, we should be touching on the number 6 in Scriptures, but it shall not be at length as we have done with other numbers which are foregoing, since there is not much to say, because we have already done all the work that's needed to know how this numerical symbolism is employed in Scriptures, and for which effort I'm now hopeful that now we know how to recognize what these numbers are for in Scriptures and to what things they refer. That is, to represent creations of influence, whereby this figure of 6 represents creations of the 6th day, chief of whom is man, who also was created to rule as a being of influence over others, some of whom are well known today, yet for other reasons. For an example, the others over whom man was given to be a ruler, being the dragons of the 7 mountains. And so the fact that man was things we don't see in him today can be seen how that by the help of higher powers, man is capable of great deeds or feats when any of his 5 senses are aided by higher powers, evil or not. In these circumstances, man is therefore capable of higher abilities or realities, if any of his abilities in him is helped by higher powers, and therefore achieving far higher realities for himself than what he is capable of as a natural man. These aspects are manifested in other creations, in that they can achieve higher realities when dealing with other creations. But for an example, in angels appear and go, that reflects their influence in the innate influence given them by God, but which things man is not capable of. These are the aspects which these numerical symbols indicate. Now, these aspects are manifested in other creations, creations among whom even Adam was given to rule, but without help of outside influence, because they are created, so they have influence in themselves. But man has since lost these innate abilities. It is these innate abilities whose overall influence is indicated by these numbers according to the day of their creation. That is concerning creations of influence, because not all of them are creations of influence. Therefore, while other creations of influence still have their powers today, wicked or not, but man has since lost his, because Adam sinned. It was God's image on him that enabled him to walk in these extra abilities of a ruler above others we know today, who still have theirs, of whom are the dragons of the seven mountains. Man's issues in numerical symbolism are represented by the number 6 because he was created on the 6th day, even as others, for an example, the dragons of the 5th day, have their unique influence represented by the number 5, where their issues appears in issues of dominion, their number is 5. But other creations of the 6th day are also represented by this number 6 because these numbers reflect the creation day of creations of influence. So these numbers reflect the creation day of rulers, even though they are not derived from the sequence of the creation day, because these numerical symbols go all the way into their tens, but the creation sequence ends on the 7th day. So that's the reason the angel said 666 is the number of a man, to imply that there are numbers not of man. Even though this very 66, as recorded in Revelation, is to this day not agreed upon by those who have the original text from which the Gospels were translated. So they contend that it's another number, not the 666. But that's besides the point. So we won't dwell on that. But the presence of a 6 is prophetic. And so whenever it appears in prophetic context or figurative measures or counts, a 6 signifies creations of the 6th day, of whom is man, but man in a form that has influence in himself above what we know man or a normal human being to be today. Obviously, man as we know him today has not this influence signified by the number 6, or even to not have appeared in the book of Revelation, but being a singular state when man shall be or shall have powers. That's why we have the number 666, because it shall be in singular circumstances. Anyway, he has no this influence signified by this number, save if empowered by an outside influence. And even in which case, he cannot strictly be signified by the number 6, because this concerns innate influence as given by God. So it means he shall be changed in some way, because there are humans today who are empowered to do things beyond what a natural man is, but they cannot be signified by the number 6. So this concerns a nature that is changed entirely to have innate powers. This influence then man lost in Adam when Adam died to God. Man was more than what we know him to be today. He was the sort of things we saw for an example of Samson to be, but obviously even far more, because those he was given to rule over as spirit forms. So no matter how strong flesh can be, yet that cannot affect spirits. So in that form, man was higher in some respect above other creations, including the very dragons we know of the 7 mountains, who are called fishes in Genesis, and some called fowls, and some called cattle. The behemoth of Job, chapter 38. Therefore, man even as a dead creation today, spiritually, yet the occultists, somehow by the angels of darkness who are higher than man, these occultists are still able to exploit elements in man that make him higher as a creation, in that they subject their souls to supernatural experiences which defy abilities of a natural man. These are the issues which numerical symbolism specified according to creations of influence, but respecting their day of creation. So when you read Ezekiel's temple measures in that house concern rulers of all kinds. So all these measures in Ezekiel's temple concern various classes of creations whom God has given to rule over his creation. Whenever you see a measure of a 6 or a direct multiple of it, then it is man or creations of the 6th day besides man that have the reference in circumstances of influence over lesser creations than them, things that Adam was when he was still with God in the Garden of Eden. Even though context matters, because for an example, in that very Ezekiel's temple or the Ezekiel's house, the number or the measure 6 on its own does not signify what the measure of 60 means in Ezekiel's house. Or when we come to the book of Revelation, the number 666 does not signify the same things as the measure 1600 fathoms after judgment. The second issue which can change the meaning of these numbers in the context is that other rulers may be in the context who are not men or other creations of the sixth day, but given that measure of 6, it means that these rulers are in the context as rulers of a man or other creations of the sixth day. And so themselves, when they are involved in issues of man, they can be given a measure of 6 to signify specific things about man's circumstances in the context. So other rulers who are not man but set over man's issues can also be in the picture because of how these measures and counts are used. So context is key. So that is all that can be said as to what a 6 means in scripture. But the common element is that creations of the sixth day of whom man is are in the picture in both scenarios of 666 and 1600 fathoms in the book of Revelation concerning judgments. And the second case of Ezekiel's house, where we are given 6 as a measure of 60 cubits of the pillars. It is in the context of righteousness. So having gone through this topic of numerical symbolism with much difficulty to illustrate, I also realized that many things in Genesis are mishandled or ignored or simply unnoticed. And yet the creation account is a link to many concepts in scriptures which are crucial to a better understanding of the Christian doctrine, including this numerical symbolism, besides concepts many in scriptures not at all heard of in the pulpits on our Sundays or Saturdays. And this numerical symbolism suffered the most distortion of all teachings in Christianity. Therefore, our next teaching is to embark on Genesis to uncover many concepts in scriptures by a close reading of it, close reading of its account. And therefore this teaching of Genesis may take us weeks because there are many concepts that we ought to touch upon, parts that were distorted or simply ignored or not noticed, for they are crucial part in understanding prophecies elsewhere in scriptures. So our next topic is the creation account in the book of Genesis.